There's one thing I can't stand about LA. All the damn vampires. Vampire The Masquerade Bloodlines is a perfect example of how the whole of something can be infinitely greater than the sum of its parts. Famously released undercooked, it can seem on the surface like an unpolished mess, full of texture-popping, broken animations, awful AI, and janky combat. It also had graphics that weren't anything to write home about, even at the time, and didn't do very well commercially, being a PC-only game with something of a niche audience. And yet, it's one of the most well-loved games ever, and in the minds of many, the absolute king of the immersive sim, which they feel quite a few modern developers should be looking to for inspiration even today. It is the very definition of a cult classic in gaming, with a following so devoted that modders are still updating that all-important community patch for it, and players still going on just one more playthrough to see if there's something else they can uncover, or some new fan theory they can bring up to talk about even now. So, what is it about this game that inspires so much love and loyalty, where so many other titles released in a substandard state fade into obscurity, becoming nothing more than developmental cautionary tales? To answer that question, we'll have to journey into the darkest depths of the LA nights, and deal with the most twisted and perverse creatures that dwell within. So strap in everyone, it's time to be embraced. This is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Powered by Valve's Source Engine and developed by Troika Games, Bloodlines is a massive immersive sim with a heavy focus on storytelling, characters and intrigue, with things like combat being something of a lower priority, at least at the start of the game. The game is set in the World of Darkness, which is a tabletop role-playing game set in a world that seems much like our own, but is inhabited secretly by just about every supernatural creature you could imagine. This game has its own massive lore that spans dozens of books, games, and comics. Fortunately though, this game does such a good job of explaining the important points to the player that you don't need to be a veteran of the tabletop game at all to follow along with the story. And speaking of stories, this is usually the part where I try to summarize the events of the story, but having already tried and failed 3 times to write that out now, I'll start by saying that this story is a vast and complex intrigue, with so many branching paths, subplots and twists, that if I were to try and go into it in any depth on this topic, we'd be here for about as long as it'd take to play the whole game. So, in the broadest strokes. Opening on a, to put it mildly, seedy and run-down room, we hear the noises of 2 people engaged in a passionate coupling. But it seems one of them has a very big surprise for the other. And just like that, our unfortunate newly birthed kindred and their sire are dragged up on stage to be put on trial, with the entire aristocracy of the night gathered as the Prince of LA, a man of short stature and an attitude to overcompensate for it, charges the fledgling sire with the crime of making a new vampire without his express permission. The assembled monsters seem either indifferent or bored out of their minds, and I can only assume that our new hero isn't taking things all that well. The execution is carried out with more than a little bravado, and with the sire dead, the prince turns his eyes upon the fledgling, no more than an unknowing pawn in a political game he never knew existed. Their second death for the night seems imminent when...
Therefore, I have decided that...
This is bullshit!
Whoever this newcomer to the proceedings is, they certainly seem to hold some sway over the prince's judgment, and the blade is turned aside at the last second. Our hero, it seems, shall be given a chance.
So, what I'm offering is not generosity, but the opportunity to transcend the fate woven by your sire.
And just like that, they are ejected from the theatre, barely aware of what they are or where they should go from here. Waking up from what was no doubt the worst night of his life, the fledgling comes to understand that just because they are now an all-powerful predator of the night doesn't mean they've escaped the trappings of society. Vampires, it seems, have a strict hierarchy, with elders at the top of the pile dictating the rules to everyone, and fledglings like himself at the bottom, licking their boots for scraps. And with the prince more than happy to send what he perceives as a loose end on very dangerous assignments that will probably end in his final death, our hero will set about doing his bidding while simultaneously becoming the bitch of just about every kindred in the city who needs something done for them. The main plot centers around finding an ancient sarcophagus that may or may not contain the sleeping body of a vampire deity that, if awakened, may or may not kickstart the end of the world. In tracking this thing down, our fledgling will be doing laps of Santa Monica, downtown LA, Hollywood, and Chinatown. And I can't stress enough that absolutely nothing is ever easy at all. For every step our protagonist takes towards their goal, another barrier or self-important vampire will rise up to send him scampering away to run some other errand in order to get them out of the way. In Santa Monica, for example, he'll have to explore a haunted hotel to find a locket so that the ghosts inhabiting the building can be exorcised, an experience so terrifying that it will forever be burned into my psyche. In downtown LA, they'll fight a death cult that's trying to start a lethal epidemic. Why does this look familiar? Be sent hunting for magical artifacts by whatever the hell this thing is.
What if, besides the blood of the living, you had to eat pounds of their flesh to maintain that thin facade of life?
And take care of the Russian mafia on behalf of a very persuasive club owner. Then, in Hollywood, our hero will be sent chasing down a snuff movie ring that are dealing in some truly terrifying product. A trail that will lead to...
Smell. Cursed tremere, blood hangs heavy on the air. Young, too. Squirming larva of the wretched brood who stole their immortality.
As well as fight a gargoyle inside a spectacular old Chinese theatre and take a shotgun to swarms of zombies trying to escape from the cemetery. In Chinatown, he'll meet the Kuei Jin, a race of vampires from the Far East who, despite their civility, are technically at war with the Western kindred and seem more than a little happy to gaslight by slipping passive-aggressive digs into their conversations and insisting that no offense is intended, and it's all on you perceiving it that way.
Oh no, dear kindred. You misunderstand me. I mean no disrespect.
And to top it all off, they'll become embroiled in a conflict between 3 different vampire factions, all vying for control of the city, and ultimately be betrayed by the prince of the city, have a blood hunt called on them, and have to fight their way to safety before finally choosing a side and making a final play for the city, the sarcophagus, and whatever may be inside it. Believe me when I say that I am barely scratching the surface here. However, far more than the story, it's the characters that I feel really sell this world. There are just so many truly memorable faces and personalities, ranging from the mundane to complete caricatures.
I could have been undressing.
These are good remedies for many problems. No credit cards.
What great story could exist without great characters? What tale could be told without mighty heroes and evil villains to populate its pages? The story of Bloodlines is great, but it's carried so much further by the incredible collection of misfit characters that populate its world. Everything from college girls and shirtless rockers to insane fanatical inquisitors and the truly depraved. Bloodlines has it all, and these characters, more than anything, bring the world to life and make this game oh so much more than a collection of buggy mechanics and animations. The major power players in LA are Prince LaCroix, a man who seems to have been crafted with no redeeming features. Seemingly suffering from Napoleon syndrome, he puffs himself up in his suit while hiding behind his very imposing sheriff, and embodies everything about an insecure manager of minimum wage paid part-time staff. He is opposed by Nines Rodriguez, a charismatic and very capable warrior who embodies everything a great leader should be.
Good effort.
And Ming Zhao, a Kuei-Jin vampire from China who, while considerably more charming than LaCroix, is no less devious, and whose true face is far less beautiful and far more fitting than the one she presents to the fledgling during their passive-aggressive, insult-filled conversations. Finally, there's the monstrous Andrei, a vampire who has fully abandoned his humanity and spends his time researching how to torture and mutilate people. Creepy, certainly, but much like a teenager with a face full of metal and a sleeve full of tattoos, I just feel like he's trying far too hard to sell us on just what a monster he really is. But it's the side characters that really bring this world to life. Honestly, there isn't a single throwaway line of dialogue or half-arsed voice acted in the entire insane pack of them, especially among the kindred. Early in Santa Monica, we meet Teresa and Jeanette Vorman, a pair of twins with drastically different personalities and styles, who don't seem to get on very well. This gets especially weird when, well...
You stay out of this! To think anyone would risk their life for this filthy, tainted waste of blood! This will just make it easier to kill both of you. Help! Save me and I'll help you find Bertram! I swear! Shut up, Jeanette! I warned you to stay away from Tongue.
She's undoubtedly Malkavian.
Then there's Beckett, a vampire historian who's one of the few old enough and strong enough to be a true individualist and go wherever he wants. And I just love the cheeky little faces he pulls when he's being condescending towards the fledgling. It's so charming that I honestly can't be mad at him, and found myself really taken with him by the end of the game. But among all the great voices and lines in the game, one creature shines out above all others as the absolute best, and... well, I'll just let him introduce himself.
Behind you, boss. Whoa! What? You don't recognize me from the pictures? Gorgeous Gary Golden?
Gorgeous Gary Golden is a suave, debonair monster that lives deep in the sewers of Hollywood and has dinner parties with corpses. There is sincerely no truer monster in the game. Well, maybe the Inquisitors. Gary is from Clan Nosferatu, whose condition comes with one big drawback. Most vampires in the game can kind of pretend to be human to some degree or another. They can look in the mirror and kid themselves that they are not all that different from who they were before all this happened to them. Andrei is an exception here, but he did that to himself, and could actually undo it any time he wanted to. But the Nosferatu don't have that luxury. They can either fully accept what they've become, or let it destroy them, and Gary has utterly embraced his unlife. He lives in the sewer with the filth because none of that matters to him. He can't get sick. He doesn't need or want sex, so physical attraction isn't a problem for him either, and he uses his powers of invisibility to go anywhere he wants. He is the master voyeur, and he and his brood work on gathering secrets and trading information. He isn't afraid of the prince or his sheriff, and he's not above transforming someone into a monster like him just to teach them a lesson about vanity. Gary knows everything, and he and his brood can get into anywhere. Nothing is safe from him. Andrei may know how to make people scream, but Gary inspires the kind of fear that makes people pretend not to notice that one shadow in their house is a little too long and a little too dark when they lock their doors for the night before going to bed, for fear that he may be standing in it. Like any immersive sim, Bloodlines has a play-your-way focus. This is reflected in the somewhat intimidating variety of skills you can spec into on your character sheet, and level design that, mostly, accommodates a variety of approaches to each objective. The game does have some problems in this regard, at least for anyone going in blind, but we'll get to that later. At character creation, you're going to have a pool of points to start forming your build, and as I've said before, it's a little unfair when games make you do this with absolutely no concept of what you might be getting into, and how useful certain skills are compared to others on your first playthrough. However, without a doubt at this point, your most important choice is going to be your vampire clan. There are 7 available clans, and each will have an impact on your game to one degree or another. This can be in subtle ways, like how vampires of the same clan as you will have extra dialogue options, or in major ways, as in the case of the Nosferatu and the Malkavians, where it will almost turn the entire game on its head. However, probably the most important thing will be what disciplines you gain access to. These are vampiric powers unique to each clan, and they can have a big impact on how you play the game, making you incredibly potent in different areas, such as melee combat, stealth, or in social situations, and these things are so much fun. Much of the footage you see here was captured from a Tremere clan playthrough. Tremere are blood mages, and their unique power of thaumaturgy allows you to do anything from attack people by spitting your own blood at them, or literally boiling someone's blood up inside them, causing them to explode. But the sheer variety of powers available in different clans range from Matrix-style bullet time, turning invisible, and even transforming into a werewolf-esque beast form. Disciplines are powered by blood, and as you can imagine, there's only one way to get that. But again, you can build stealth combat strategies against mortal enemies, using something as simple as basic level domination and feeding. You can get very creative with these, and they really are a lot of fun. As I mentioned before, there are 2 clans for whom things are significantly different, that being the Malkavians and the Nosferatu. It is generally recommended that new players choose another clan first to get a more vanilla playthrough, and then do one of these after. The Malkavians you see are completely insane. The patriarch of the Malkavian clan may be asleep, but his mind infects every one of his bloodline, and he whispers forbidden knowledge into their ears. This is how we get the likes of Therese and Jeanette sharing the same body, and the clinical sociopathy of Alistair Grout, who seems like a really nice and reasonable guy when you listen to his recordings, but a look around his house will have you feeling, well... The moment you awaken as a Malkavian, you're going to have a lot more conversation options, simply based on the fact your brain isn't altogether properly wired. This can lead to wacky or even scarily insightful dialogue, or just things like conversations with your TV. What this means is, everyone is going to react to you very differently from most other clans. And as this is a largely dialogue and character driven game, it's going to lead to quite a different experience overall. The Nosferatu, as I've mentioned before, wear what they are on their faces. They don't have the option of blending in like the rest of the kindred, and anyone who takes a look at them is at best going to see a person with severe deformities and start making judgments, and at worst, start putting 2 and 2 together and getting 6. This means that you'll be steering clear of most of the humans, moving through the sewers, and stealthing and turning invisible. Some people have called this the game's unofficial hard mode, and I can see what they're getting at. You aren't going to be playing a very charismatic build with this guy, but spend your points wisely, and you've got an invisible silent stalker that strikes fear into the heart of his enemies just by stepping out of the shadows. While there are a variety of skills available, I don't think anyone is going to be getting very far in this game without investing to some degree in the security skill for lockpicking, the computer skill for hacking, and at least a little bit of stealth. If only because there are certain missions where you are expressly told not to be seen while completing them. Fortunately, the game is very generous with its experience points, so by the late game you should have a lot of options at your disposal. Lockpicking is overall a pretty basic system. Activate the door, wait for the animation to play, and see if you're up to the task. This is fine, as just like hacking minigames, lockpicking can be very frustrating if done wrong. Yes, I'm looking at you, Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Of course, if you're just under the needed skill level, you can use a power called Blood Buff that lets you burn blood to boost your physical stats and push you over the requirements for success, which again is really cool. But more so than the lockpicking, we have to talk about the hacking. Now, to be clear, even at the time this game came out, no one was checking their emails using a DOS prompt like this. But man, what an awesome little retro throwback this is. This game was very much designed for the PC and for keyboard and mouse. If you want to type on the computer, you have to use the keyboard. And can we take a moment to appreciate just how meta that is? Here, the player sits at their keyboard, looking at a screen, typing in commands while their character does exactly the same thing. This is actually why the classic immersive sim is almost exclusively in first person. It sells the idea that you are the one doing these things. One of the standout features here, however, are the social skills. Lacking anything as complex as Human Revolution's negotiation system, you can spec into various social skills and abilities to gain access to new conversation lines in dialogue trees. Pink lines, for example, represent seduction lines, which allow you to charm what you want from a target up to and including their blood. While other options include persuasion and intimidation, which will provoke different reactions depending on the person and which option you choose. Going back to your disciplines, these can be put to good use here too. As a Tremere, I also had access to the Dominate discipline, and I could use it to make people forget things and just straight up get them to do what I wanted, no questions asked, skipping entire combats in the process, which was not only really cool, but it also really helped in creating that feeling that I'm some kind of supernatural predator that these tiny mortals mess with at their peril. Bloodlines was made at a time before games felt the need to hold your hand every step of the way too. What that means is, just like OG Deus Ex, there's no minimap or objective markers to help you with your missions. So when the game tells you to track down a car with a certain registration number, you'd better start checking the registration numbers of every car you walk past. You can buy yourself some respite by speccing into stats and skills that raise your investigation feat, or switch on your vampiric Auspec's power, but you are more or less on your own here. On one hand, this does provide an incredible sense of achievement as you piece together clues to find what you're looking for. On the other, it can be very frustrating to go searching all over LA for some obscure item that has no business being in the place you find it and is almost indistinguishable from the scenery. Combat exists. It's not bad, but it's not the game's strong point by a long shot, which is why it's a shame that quite a few missions, especially the endgame, are so entrenched in it. This may speak to the somewhat unfinished nature of the game in general, but back when it was released, quite a few people who'd created a stealth social character found themselves utterly outclassed by the late game's enemies. I myself had created a gangrel, and had built my combat style around being a stealthy predator, using animalism for most of my fighting. And while some of the earlier missions especially played out exactly like that, and I was quite formidable one-on-one, it got really frustrating when I was fighting zombie hordes that could auto-detect me as soon as I entered their combat area, and rooms full of guys with Uzis who would all just stand and stare at the room's one entrance, because they hadn't had any kind of patrol route scripted into them. Railroading people is a big no-no in an immersive sim. There should always be options. Fortunately, on a second playthrough, you should have enough foresight to spec into firearms and melee to some degree. The pistol they give you at the start of the game is pretty useless, but the endgame ranged weapons are perfectly fine. The gunplay isn't up to much exactly, but the weapons have great sound effects and animations and feel powerful and satisfying to use. It's just such a shame that even the regular guards can soak gunshots to the face. Melee combat is also there, but pretty basic. Again, the animations are nice, or as good as they get in this game, and the impact sound effects are satisfying, but lacking anything resembling a dodge function or a block that does anything of value, it's basically just like playing Diablo. There is, however, a really cool stealth takedown system that I hadn't seen anything like before, and on the missions where you can do it, it's very satisfying taking out rooms full of enemies this way. I will say that I had a lot more fun as a Tremere, combining blood magic, domination, stealth and ranged weapons versus being a gangrel, who was all stealth and brawl. I think it just goes to show that diversity is probably the real key to success and enjoyment here. The world of Bloodlines is LA by night, and is a hub world on such a scale that we wouldn't see it matched until we got to Prague and Deus Ex Mankind Divided. The beauty of hub worlds is they allow for all kinds of RPG interactions and side quests, but have a much greater focus overall than full open worlds. Open worlds also run the risk of feeling somewhat empty, and developers can feel the need to populate them with busy work just so the player feels a need to explore. Not so here. Every inch of the 4 major LA districts is put to good use, from the depths of the sewers to the heights of the tallest buildings. The stories, quests and characters encourage you to see it all, and believe me, the developers milked every last drop of content they could out of these areas. The 4 major locations are Santa Monica, downtown LA, Hollywood, and Chinatown. Each area has something unique about it, something that gives it its own character, and tons of little places to stop by and investigate. Whether it's the Asylum Club in Santa Monica, the old Chinese theatre in Hollywood, or a derelict building inhabited by a plague cult in downtown, there's an incredible amount of detail and personality weaved into all these little sections. The hubs also have some of the best ambient music of any game I've ever played, and it really works to enhance the atmosphere and give these areas their own unique flavour. The other areas fall into what we might call dungeon areas, as they are populated with mostly hostile NPCs that need to be bypassed. Many of these early areas, like the Sabat warehouse and the ship, can be stealthed pretty easily thanks to some very generous detection AI. But as we dive further in, it's going to feel more and more like the only way through many of these locations is a fight. The raid on the Society of Leopold is one such example, but I feel at least with this one there's a modicum of sense here. This is, after all, a highly organised pseudo-military outfit, so having people patrol in groups so they can't be picked off one at a time makes sense. Still, from a gaming point of view, more options into the building would have been nice to accommodate playstyles. Probably the worst offenders, though, are the sewers below Hollywood and the Hallowbrook Hotel, which are both late-game dungeons. The sewers start right after a fairly tough boss fight, so you're already probably low on blood, bullets and health, and it's a labyrinth populated with these flesh monstrosities that Andrea has human centipeded together to keep the Nosferatu busy. These things have no specific weakness and are very great in number, meaning that if you don't know your way around these sewers, you're in for a slog. In the hotel, you're fighting Sabat vampires and their thugs, and firstly, just how many of these things are there? I can get behind all the gangers who want to become the next batch of shovelheads, but there are way too many vampires in here. I do like the touch of the blinded civilians kept around as blood sacks though. Secondly, this is a linear maze similar to an old school corridor shooter, with only one path through it, and enemies that spawn attack you, regardless of whether or not you're stealthing. We have vampires here, just standing around in full animal form, when for the player, taking this shape requires a significant blood burn and has a time limit. I won't say that I didn't have fun in this level as a Tremere using my domination blood boil guns blazing approach, but in Deus Ex, every level has a large variety of routes to the final objective, and when this game is at its best, it feels very much the same. This is clearly a very unpolished part of the game, and as it basically kickstarts the endgame, it's a grim foreshadowing of things to come. But don't for a second think that all the dungeons are bad, or that this is in any way a deal breaker. As I said before, it's only really a problem on your first run if you aren't planning on speccing into those combat skills. Most players these days will be smart enough to design character builds around this late game shift, while still speccing into the playstyle they want. Even amongst the dungeons, there are some really great locations, like the mansion of an insane doctor, and anyone who's played this game is going to tell you that the Ocean House Hotel may be one of the best horror experiences in gaming. More than any other location or quest, this is the most memorable moment in the whole game, and I've probably had more conversations about this one scene than I have of the other politics and intrigue in the entire game. I know I've already cried spoilers here, but if you are someone who has never played this game, then now is absolutely the time to stop watching this video. Buy and install the game and do this mission. I absolutely promise you this is something truly special, and you really need to experience this for yourself. At night, alone, in a dark room. Don't worry, it's right at the start. we can wait. Okay, you back? So as hopefully everyone here knows, the Ocean House Hotel is a prime piece of real estate that has stood uninhabited since a fire destroyed a good piece of it. This is in no small part due to the grisly family murder-suicide that took place prior to the fire, and the fact that at least 2 of the family's very real ghosts are trapped there, constantly playing out their traumatic end for all time. One of them, being a poltergeist, is also more than willing and able to bring new members into this exclusive club of theirs. Back in my RE7 retrospective, I talked about what horror is. It is basically a consensual illusion entered into between us and some kind of media that we are engaging with, be it a movie, a book, or a game. That is to say, you have to give yourself to a scary story in order for it to actually work. Now the media, in this case the game, does have to put in some work on their end in order for you to suspend your disbelief and get you to unconsciously meet them in the middle. In movies, for example, we need time to become invested in the characters before bad things start to happen, or we don't care, and it's more of a shock fest than horror. See every teen slasher flick ever. In the case of games, since we the player are controlling an avatar in the game, we already have that investment in that we are imagining we are there ourselves. It is a true testament then to the artistry on display here, that despite coming back so many years later, despite having been down so many dark holes in the gaming world, and despite the obvious limitations of its graphics that weren't even all that good at the time, that my pulse started to race the moment I heard that music and saw those double doors staring at me once again. This really is one of those rare cases of horror done right. Resident Evil defined the horror gaming genre with gore and jump scares, but it wasn't until its 7th official title that it produced anything close to a scary experience that focused on atmosphere and disempowerment, which is exactly what we have here. There is no big monster lurking in the depths of this hotel. No big final fight. Just the sense that something is all around you, watching you, hating you. It lashes out by throwing things at you, and there's nothing you can do about it. There are no enemies to shoot, and nothing you can hit with your axe or your sword. On the streets of LA, you may be the alpha predator, but in this house, you are absolutely at the mercy of these wraiths and their game. The only thing you can do is survive while you search for what you need. I've actually rewritten the script for this retrospective more times than any other so far. Between trying to summarize the story in a way that could possibly do it any justice, find space to talk about all my favourite characters and moments without rambling on and on and on, and just not getting too hung up on the negatives, it's been difficult to collect all the vast multitudes of thoughts and feelings I have about this game into one place. And hopefully, that says more about this game than anything else so far. Why is this game so loved despite its shortcomings? Heart. This game has so much heart. It's quite clear that everyone who was working on this was pouring their heart and soul into it, and it's only a matter of bad circumstances that led to it releasing in its final state. But every character, every line, every environment is just brimming with love, and a burning desire to tell a great story and give the player a wonderful and unique experience. Not trap them into some repetitive gameplay loop so they can give them an option to buy out of it for real money. This is a truly one-of-a-kind experience, and it is something I am so happy I played back when it launched and can still come back to even today and find just as much enjoyment now as I did back then. Finally, it would be a true crime to talk about this game and not bring up the unofficial patch that has been in development since it was released. This one single mod has fixed so many bugs, as well as allowed the game to play on modern PCs with Windows 10. The people working on this are truly wonderful people who have given so much to this game and its fanbase for absolutely nothing in return. I do not have words to express my gratitude for this, but it is also very telling that any game could inspire so much loyalty and work. So sincerely, with all my heart, thank you. I'd also like to take a moment to talk about the upcoming Bloodlines 2 game, set to be published by Paradox Interactive, who now own the entire World of Darkness, and have been doing quite a lot with it recently. This game was scheduled for release in 2021, but there have been a few problems. I'm not going to speculate because I have no real information to go on. I only wish everyone who is and was involved well, and hope that a great final product can be made that provides an experience just as amazing as this game without any of the hang-ups. Until then though,
remember, wherever we go, it is the blood of Cain which makes our fate. Farewell, vampire.
and with that, our fledgling decides their fate and walks their path. I hope they took everyone's advice and didn't open it. LaCroix may have it coming, but being in the wrong place at the wrong time isn't a crime. Well, maybe bad judgment is. Stories, as I've said before though, are often just reflections and metaphors of real life. And while vampires and werewolves may not exist, there are truly terrible things that haunt the streets at night. There is corruption eating at the very core of humanity. There are people who move innocent lives like chess pieces across a board and sacrifice them for crimes they never knew they had committed. Such power players hold all the cards, the money, the drugs, the guns, and they stamp out any who stand against them with the utmost brutality, so as to inspire fear in any who would consider rebellion. Against such monsters, is there anyone or anything capable of fighting back? Well, how about a man with nothing to lose?